Hey folks, today we're going to do books 16 and 17 of the Odyssey. Obviously, we've skipped some. I've got to bring you up to speed on what you've missed. And they're going to try and do that a little bit in this italics here. But I want to recall where we're at, what's going on before we jump into book 16. So if we go back to the image we've been using throughout these videos, um, we've finally tracked Odysseus back to Ithaca here, stage 16 of his journey. He started out in Troy. Sailed to the land of the Cicones, fought a battle, lost some men, went to the land of the Lotus Eaters, had to drag his men back to his ship so that they wouldn't stay there forever, ended up in the island of the Cyclops, had his ordeal with the Cyclops, and had the logic puzzle his way out of the Cyclops' cave. Went to the land of Aeolus, who gave him a bag of the winds to get him home, made it within sight of Ithaca before his men opened the bag of the wind, which blew him back to Aeolus. Aeolus was like, hey, get out of here, you're cursed by the gods. Of course he was, because Poseidon's son, Polyphemus the Cyclops, had cursed him. Ended up at the land of the Laestrygones, where his entire fleet was destroyed and eaten by these cannibals, except for his own ship, which got away and landed on the Isle of Circe. But his crew got turned into pigs, and he had to use this plant called Molly and the divine intervention of Hermes to help him, get his crew back. And then Circe sent him to the land of the dead to talk to Tiresias, the prophet, who told him that the only way to get home in one piece was to avoid eating the cattle of the sun god, otherwise he'd lose all his men, and it would be years before he got home. Sailed back to the island of Circe, past the island of the Sirens, past Scylla and Charybdis, lost some men, ended up on the island of the sun god, where his men ate the cattle of the sun god. Then Zeus destroyed their ship, and he was blown back through Scylla and Charybdis and ended up on the island with Calypso, where he was trapped for 7 years until Hermes finally came with a message that he could build a raft and leave. Then he sailed to Phaeacia, where he was alone and naked in the woods, but he met the king's daughter Nausicaa, and got some clothes and got invited to dinner, and then told his story, and the king of Phaeacia then promised him a ship to take him to Ithaca. And that's pretty much where we left off. So let's see what the summary tells us, and then I will try and fill you in with a little bit more about what's going on. So, part 2, The Homecoming, book 16, Father and Son. In books 13 to 15, King Alcinous and his friends send Odysseus on his way home. They actually give him a lot of treasure. They all give him a gift, and the gifts are tripods and bars of silver and bars of gold. And so he's coming back with some wealth, which is nice. Odysseus sleeps while the rowers bring him to Ithaca. When he awakens, he fails to recognize his homeland until Athena appears and tells him that he is indeed home. All right, pause. There's a lot that goes on here. Zeus puts sleep on Odysseus' eyes so he doesn't wake up, and the crew of the Phaeacian ship can't wake him up when they get him to Ithaca, and so they take him off the ship and they put him on the shore, and they take all of his gifts and treasures off the ship, and they put them in this grotto, this nymph's sea cave, near where they put him on shore. When he wakes up, he doesn't know where he is, and he's not sure what's going on. And then Athena shows up, but Athena is disguised as an old man. Mentees, I think the guy is, not mentor, mentees. I don't know. But she comes to see him, and Odysseus tells her this fictitious lie about himself, that he is related to the king of Crete, who is a son of Minos. You guys remember Minos from the Theseus story. But that his mom was a slave girl, and so he's what's called a bastard son, and he's on the run because he murdered someone. Like, there's this whole big story that Odysseus just makes up on the spot to give him an alternate identity. But then Athena's like, shut up, Odysseus. I know who you are. I'm Athena. Boom, and she turns into Athena, and Odysseus is like, oh my God, literally. Right? And so they he meets with her, and she tells him to go see a swineherd whose name is Eumaeus. I think that's where we left off. She disguises him as an old man so that he can surprise the suitors, and then urges him to visit his faithful swineherd Eumaeus. Yep, a swineherd is somebody who tends pigs, and he lives up in the mountains. And so Odysseus, Athena, taps him with her magic wand, and Odysseus turns into an old beggar man, really ugly and filthy. And so he treks up to the home of the swineherd Eumaeus. The swineherd welcomes the disguised Odysseus and tells him about what has been happening in Odysseus's home. Athena goes to Telemachus and tells him to return home. She warns him of the suitor's plot to kill him and advises him to stay with the swineherd for a night. Telemachus does as she bids. So there's a lot that happens there. Odysseus shows up at the home of the swineherd. Swineherd is this really poor guy who lives a poor life, eking out an existence as a swineherd to Odysseus, but he's a very faithful man. He loves Odysseus. He's very upset at how the suitors have been treating Odysseus's property and Odysseus's wife and son. He takes Odysseus in, even though he doesn't know who he is. He's just an old beggar, and he gives him a dinner and a place to sleep and some clothes, and like really treats him with the kind of hospitality that you would expect. He gives him everything that he can, given the poor nature of his situation. And then he talks to Odysseus, asks who Odysseus is, and Odysseus continues with this story about how he's the bastard son of the king of Crete, and that he went to the Trojan War, and that he knew Odysseus when he was at the Trojan War. He's able to tell the swineherd enough stuff that the swineherd believes that he actually knew Odysseus and had met him. And so then the swineherd starts telling Odysseus about his own house and about the suitors and how they're mistreating it and how terrible things are there. And so Odysseus gets an earful about the situation at his house. Good intelligence for him, because he's got to go there and deal with this problem shortly. And then, of course, Telemachus is heading home from Pylos, and the suitors are waiting to murder him. And so Athena goes to Telemachus and suggests that he not land on the front of the island, but that he land on the back of the island and he go visit Eumaeus. And so Telemachus decides to do that. Athena brings down a fog that disguises the ship and hides it from the suitors. Telemachus gets off the ship and goes to see Eumaeus the swineherd, and finds Eumaeus already has company, this old beggar man. And so we have this reunion of Telemachus and Odysseus, but Telemachus does not know that the old beggar man is Odysseus. And so this is an interesting reunion from our perspective as an audience or as a reader of this story. This is what's called dramatic irony, when the reader knows something that the character does not know. Telemachus does not know he's talking to his father. We know that he is. And that adds a dimension to the story. So I think that's enough to go on so that we can start reading. We're now back in the storyteller's voice, so I don't have to put on my Odysseus voice except when Odysseus is talking. So remember that when Odysseus left, Telemachus was a baby, a toddler, toddling around on wobbly legs, and now he's essentially a man, and he doesn't know his father at all. So that's going to be an important piece of information to think about. This reunion is going to be, when it happens, an awkward one, because the kid doesn't know his dad. And maybe has some resentment because his dad's been gone his entire life. I think that's perfectly natural, and that's something that's human, that transcends centuries. It doesn't matter how long ago this was written. So anyway, I'm going to start reading. But there were two men in the mountain hut, Odysseus and the swineherd. At first light, blowing their fire up, they cooked their breakfast and sent their lads out, driving herds to root in the tall timber. When Telemachus came, the wolvish troop of watchdogs only fawned on him as he advanced. The dogs all know Telemachus. So they're like, oh my gosh, the dogs did not know Odysseus. And so when he showed up, the dogs came charging at him and barking. Odysseus heard them go and heard the light crunch of a man's footfall, at which he turned quickly to say, Eumaeus, here is one of your crew come back, or maybe another friend. The dogs are out there snuffling, belly down. Not one has even growled. I can hear footsteps. But before he finished, his tall son stood at the door. Okay. Oh. The swineherd rose in surprise, letting a bowl and jug tumble from his fingers. Going forward, he kissed the young man's head, his shining eyes, and both hands. With his own tears brimmed and fell. Think of a man whose dear and only son, born to him in exile, reared with labor, has lived 10 years abroad, and now returns. How would that man embrace his son? Just so the herdsman clapped his arms around Telemachus and covered him with kisses, for he knew the lad had got away from death. The swineherd had heard the plot of the suitors, so he knew that they were planning on killing him, and he was afraid that Telemachus was going to die. But he's very overjoyed to see Telemachus here. Now, one thing that we want to think about here is that one of the challenges that Odysseus has been facing throughout the story, and one of the growths you're going to see in him as a character, is that he's gaining better and better control over his emotions, which clearly have sway over him in various situations. Well, we're going to have a series of challenges now that he has arrived in Ithaca. He has to pretend to be somebody else, and this is his son, who he hasn't seen in 10 years. His first instinct would be to run and embrace him, but Odysseus has to pretend to be this other guy and not give in to his emotions in the face of seeing his son. Now, it's maybe a little easier with his son because he never knew his son aside from as a baby. But you can imagine that as, for example, he goes to his house and sees his wife, this is going to become a more and more difficult struggle of self-control for Odysseus as a character. Um, Anyway, for he knew the lad had got away from death. He said, and I'm going to put on my swineherd voice, "Light of my days, Telemachus, you made it back. When you took ship for Pylos, I never thought to see you again. Come in, dear child, and let me feast my eyes. Here you are, home from distant places. How rarely, anyway, you visit us. Your own men in your own woods and pastures. Always in town, a man would think you loved the suitors' company, those dogs." Telemachus, with his clear candor, said, "I am with you, uncle. See now, I have come because I wanted to see you first, and to hear from you if mother stayed at home, or is she married off to someone and Odysseus's bed left empty for some gloomy spider's weaving." So he calls him uncle. The swineherd is not his uncle, but it's a term of endearment. Like he's family, but he's not family. We have friends and family that we call family, even though they're not by blood related to us. That's what's going on here. It's a term of endearment. It's also a term of respect when he calls the swineherd this. Gently, the forester replied to this. "And home indeed your mother is, poor lady, still in the women's hall. Her nights and days are wearied out with grieving." Stepping back, he took the bronze-shod lance, and the young prince entered the cabin over the worn door-stone. Odysseus moved aside, yielding his couch. But from across the room, Telemachus checked him. "Friend, sit down. We'll find another chair in our own hut. Here's the man to make one." The swineherd, when the quiet man sank down, built a new pile of evergreens and fleeces, a couch for the dear son of great Odysseus, then gave them trenchers of good meat, left over from the roast pork of yesterday, and heaped up willow baskets full of bread, and mixed an ivy bowl of honey-hearted wine. Then he in turn sat down facing Odysseus. Their hands went out upon the meat and drink as they fell to, ridding themselves of hunger. Now we got a little skip, and it's okay. Telemachus sends a swineherd to let his mother know he has returned safely. Athena appears and urges Odysseus to let Telemachus know who he really is. So basically, Telemachus is afraid that his mother's going to be worried about him, and so he sends Eumaeus, the swineherd, down into town to talk to Penelope and tell her that he's arrived, in one piece. And so when Eumaeus the swineherd leaves, it leaves Odysseus and his son alone together. And Odysseus is trying to decide whether to reveal himself to his son or to allow his son to continue to think he's this old beggar man. When Athena appears, she's invisible and can't be heard to Telemachus, but Odysseus sees and hears her, and she suggests that he reveal himself. And so she's going to tap him with her wand and turn him back into Odysseus so his son can see him for who he really is. And this is a reunion moment. This is a big moment, especially for the theme of the importance of family. Odysseus has been trying desperately to get home, not only to his country, but to his family, to his wife and son forever. And here he is finally meeting his son. And let's see how his son accepts him and how this all goes. Saying no more, she tipped her golden wand upon the man, making his cloak pure white and the knit tunic fresh around him. Lithe and young she made him, ruddy with the sun, his jawline clean. The beard no longer grew upon his chin, and she withdrew when she had done. She gives them their privacy. Then Lord Odysseus reappeared, and his son was thunderstruck. That's obviously a metaphor. He wasn't struck by lightning. Fear in his eyes, he looked down and away as though it were a god, and he whispered, "Stranger, you are no longer who you were just now. Your cloak is new, even your skin. You are one of the gods who rule the sweep of heaven. Be kind to us. We'll make you fair oblation and gifts of hammered gold. Have mercy on us." The noble and enduring man replied, "No, God, no. Why take me for a god? No, I am that father whom your boyhood lacked and suffered pain for lack of me. I am he. Held back too long, the tears ran down his cheeks as he embraced his son. Only Telemachus, uncomprehending, wild with incredulity — that's a word that means he doesn't really believe what he's hearing. He's incredulous, he's doubting — cried out, "You cannot be my father, Odysseus. Meddling spirits conceived this trick to twist the knife in me. No man of woman born could work these wonders by his own craft unless a god came into it, with ease to turn him young or old at will. I swear you were in rags and old, and here you stand like one of the immortals." Odysseus brought his ranging mind to bear and said, "This is not princely, to be swept away by wonder at your father's appearance. No other Odysseus will ever come, for he and I are one, the same. His bitter fortune and his wanderings are mine. 20 years gone, and I am back again on my own island." Then, throwing his arms around this marvel of a father, Telemachus began to weep. Salt tears rose from the wells of longing in both men, and cries burst from both, keen and fluttering, as those of the great taloned hawk, whose nestlings farmers take before they fly. So helplessly they cried, poured out tears, and might have gone on weeping till sundown. Then we get an italics that I'm not going to stand. It says, quote, Telemachus lets Odysseus know that they face more than 100 suitors. That's a lot of people for two guys to take down. Odysseus tells Telemachus to return home. He will follow, still disguised as an old man, and Telemachus must pretend not to know him. He must also lock away Odysseus's weapons and armor. All right, that's true, but they start coming up with a plan. This is the most difficult logic puzzle that Odysseus has had to face. Yeah, the Cyclops was tough, but how do two guys take out 100? More than 100. How do you do that? And then not only, though, is this tricky, because let's say, just out of pure speculation, that Odysseus and Telemachus are successful. They're able to kill these 100 guys. Well, these 100 guys are like the best firstborn sons of all the Greeks. And what happens when you kill the firstborn son of another Greek in cold blood is you begin this thing that's called a blood feud. That family and all of the male members of that family are now honor bound to kill you. And so if Odysseus goes and kills 100 suitors in his home, he's going to create 100 blood feuds, and all of these families are going to come for him. And it's going to bathe Ithaca in blood. And we'll remember that when Paris stole the wife of Menelaus, it started a war that lasted 10 years. How much worse would it be if you killed somebody's firstborn son, right? So Odysseus is in this dangerous situation where he deserves to get revenge. So poetic justice would be to kill all these suitors. Certainly he has to overthrow them or defeat them, or somehow get his wife and his house and his family back. But how is he going to go about doing this? And we need to hear a little bit about what his plan is. Also, there's a great scene here after Odysseus talks to Telemachus about the plan. We go to Odysseus' house and we see the suitors. And we, in the reading that we've done, we haven't encountered the suitors yet. And it's important to see the suitors, the way they act and the way they behave. All you've heard is me tell you about the suitors because this version of the book hasn't given us any of their scenes. So I'm going to jump over to the other translation. Well, it's the same translation. The other version, the full book. And we're going to read a little bit more. So let's do that. Hold on one second while I do that. So helplessly they cried that they might have gone on weeping until sundown, had not Telemachus said, "Dear father, tell me, what kind of vessel put you here ashore on Ithaca? Your sailors? Who were they? I doubt you made it walking on the sea." Oopsie, just lost my spot. I don't know what I did. Hold on one sec. Then said Odysseus, who had borne the barren sea, "Only plain truth shall I tell you, child. Great seafarers, the Phaeacians, gave me passage, as they gave other wanderers, by night over the open ocean while I slept." Oh, I forgot to tell you this, but one of the things that this book skipped is Poseidon decided to punish Phaeacia for giving Odysseus passage home. The ship that dropped him off was sailing back to Phaeacia, and he turned it into a rock. Apparently there's a rock in the ocean there that looks like a ship, and this is the story of how that rock got there. Then he threatened to put up a bunch of rocks in the middle of the bay of the Phaeacians and stop them from being seafaring people forever. So the Phaeacians decided to make all kinds of sacrifices to Poseidon in hopes that he wouldn't throw up the rocks and block off their bay, but it never really tells you what happens, what the outcome of that is, what shifts to Odysseus in. Anyway, um, let's see. They gave me passage, as they gave other wanderers, by night over the open ocean while I slept. They brought me in their cutter, set me down on Ithaca with gifts of bronze and gold and stores of woven things. By the gods, Will, these are all hidden in a cave. I came to the wild place directed by Athena, so that we might lay plans to kill our enemies. Count up the suitors for me. Let me know what men at arms are there. How many men? I must put all my mind to it, and see if we two by ourselves can take them on, or if we should look round for help. Telemachus replied, "O father, all my life your fame as a fighting man has echoed in my ears, your skills with weapons and tricks of war, but what you speak of is a staggering thing, beyond imagining for me. How can two men do battle with a houseful in their prime? For I must tell you this is no affair of 10 or even twice 10 men, but scores, throngs of them. You shall see, here and now, the number from Dulichian alone is 52 picked men, with armorers, a half dozen. 24 came from Same, 20 from Zythinthos. Our own island accounts for 12 high-ranked and their retainers, Mendon the crier, and the master harper, besides a pair of handymen at feasts. If we all go in against these, I fear we may pay in salt blood for your vengeance. You must think hard if you would conjure up the fighting strength to take us through." Odysseus, who had endured the long war and the sea, answered, "I tell you now, suppose Athena's arm is over us, and Zeus, her father's, I must rack my brains for more." Clear-headed Telemachus looked hard and said, "Those two are great defenders, no one doubts it. But throned in the serene clouds overhead, other affairs of men and gods they have to rule over." And the hero answered, "Before long they will stand to right and left of us in combat, in the shouting, when the test comes, our nerve against the suitors in my hall. Here is your part. At the break of day tomorrow, home with you, go, mingle with our princes. The swineherd later on will take me down to the portside trail, a beggar by my looks, hand-dog and old. If they make fun of me in my own courtyard, let your ribs cage up your springing heart, no matter what I suffer. No matter if they pull me by the heels or practice shots at me to drive me out. Look on, hold down your anger. You may even plead with them, by heaven, in gentle terms to quit their horseplay. Not that they will heed you, rash as they are, facing the day of wrath. Now, fix the next step in your mind. Athena, counseling me, will give me word, and I shall signal to you, nodding. At that point, round up all the armor, lances, gear of war left in our hall, and stow the lot away, back in the vaulted storeroom. When the suitors miss those arms and question you, be soft in what you say. Answer, I thought I'd move them out of the smoke. They seem no longer those bright arms Odysseus left us years ago, when he went off to Troy. Here where the fire's hot breath came, they had grown black and drear. One better reason, too, I had from Zeus. Suppose a brawl starts up, when you are drunk, that you might be crazed and bloody one another, and that would stain your feast. Your courtship, tempered iron, can magnetize a man. Say that. But put aside 2 broadswords and 2 spears for our own use, 2 ox-hide shields nearby, when we go into action. Pallas Athena and Zeus, all provident, will see you through, bemusing our young friends. So Odysseus says, "All right, you got to go into town and go see my wife, your mother, Penelope, and I'm going to come in as a beggar, and they're going to treat me badly. They're going to treat me badly in my own house. They're going to treat me badly in front of you. You've got to hold your temper. You can't say a thing. You got to watch it happen. We've got to have surprise if we're going to pull this off." And he says the other thing is that we have a lot of weapons on display in the house, as many Greek homes do. Armor and shields and spears and swords all hanging on the wall or on display. You've got to get rid of them all. Take them all into the storeroom. Put this excuse that they're getting damaged by being left out in the smoke, and also the suitors get drunk and they're often angry, and what if they were to pick them up and all fight with each other? He gives a couple of good excuses. However, he wants armor and shields and swords and spears for themselves, put in some location where they can arm themselves. So Odysseus's plan at this point is to use surprise and attack the suitors, and he and Telemachus are going to be wearing bronze armor with shields and spears, and the suitors are just going to have whatever weapons they have with them, which usually they carry a sword wherever they go. And so it's going to be he's going to have an advantage in that way. Now, the number differential is still staggering, as Telemachus said. So anyway, back to it. Now, one thing more. If son of mine you are, and blood of mine, let no one hear Odysseus is about. Neither Laertes, that's his father, nor the swineherd here, nor any slave, nor even Penelope. But you and I alone must learn how far the women are corrupted, and we should know how to locate good men among our hands, the loyal and respectful, and the shirkers, who take you lightly, as alone and young. So Odysseus is like, and while I'm disguised, we got to figure out who's still loyal to Odysseus, to me, and who is not, so that we can figure out who to rely on and who to punish. His admirable son replied, "Ah, father, even when danger comes, I think you'll find courage in me. I am not a scatterbrained. But as to checking on the field hands now, I see no gain for us in that. Reflect. You make a long toil that way, if you care to look men in the eye at every farm, while these gay devils in our hall at ease eat up our flocks and herds, leaving us nothing. As for the maids, I say yes, make distinction between good girls and those who shame your house. All that I shy away from is a scrutiny of cottagers just now. The time for that comes later, if in truth you have a sign from Zeus, the Storm King." So their talk ran on, and while down the coast, now here we have a transition to the suitors. We're hearing Odysseus' plan. Now we got to see the suitors in action in the hall. So the talk ran on, while down the coast and round toward Ithaca hove the good ship that had gone out to Pylos, bearing Telemachus and his companions into the wide bay waters. On the dark land they drove her, hauled her up, took out the oars and the canvas for light-hearted squires to carry homeward, as they carried too the gifts of Menelaus round to Cleides' house. But first they sped a runner to Penelope. They knew the quiet lady must be told the prince her son had come ashore, and sent his good ship round to port. Not one soft tear should their sweet queen let fall. Both messengers, the crewman and the swineherd, remember they both had been told to tell Penelope that Telemachus had landed, reached the outer gate at the same instant, bearing the same news, and went in side by side to the king's hall. He of the ship burst out among the maids. "Your son's ashore this morning, O my queen." But the swineherd calmly stood near Penelope, whispering what her son had bade him tell, and what he had enjoined on her. No more. When he had done, he left the palace and turned back to his steading in the hills. By now, sullen confusion weighed upon the suitors. Out of the house, out of the court they went, beyond the wall and gate, to sit in council. Eurymachus, the son of Polybose, opened the discussion. "Friends, face up to it. That young pup Telemachus has done it. He made the round trip, though we said he could not. Well, now get the best craft we can find afloat, with oarsmen who can drench her bows, and tell those on the island to come home." Remember that there was a ship with like 50 suitors on an island waiting to ambush and murder Telemachus. We've got to bring those guys home, he says. He was yet speaking when Amphinomus, craning seaward, spotting the picket ship already in the roadstead under oars with canvas brailed up, and this fresh arrival made him chuckle. Then he told his friends, "Too late for messages. Look, here they come along the bay. Some god has brought them news, or else they saw the cutter pass and could not overtake her." On their feet at once, the suitors took the road to the sea beach, where, meeting the black ship, they hauled her in. Oars and gear they left for their light-hearted squires to carry, and all in a company made off for the assembly ground. All others, young and old alike, they barred from sitting. Eupitheus, son Antinous, made speech. Remember, Antinous is the worst of the suitors. And you find this out in the first book when Telemachus is getting ready to go on his journey. Antinous is the one who comes up with the plan to murder him and all that kind of things. But Antinous, if you're looking for who he is like as a character, in physical stature and in abilities, he's the foremost of the suitors, but he's also super duper arrogant. So he's kind of like I can't remember the name of the guy. Like Gaston from Beauty and the Beast. That's who he reminds me of. And I think Gaston as a character is probably written in a way that is intentionally inspired by Antinous. Anyway, so you can picture him in your head while this is going on. Eupitheus' son Antinous made a speech. "How the gods let our man escape of boarding, that is the wonder. We had lookouts posted on the heights all day in the sea wind, and every hour a fresh pair of eyes. At night we never slept ashore, but After sundown, cruised the open water to the southeast, patrolling until dawn. We were prepared to cut him off and catch him, squelch him for good and all. The power of heaven steered him the long way home. Well, let this company plan his destruction and leave him no way out this time. I see our business here unfinished while he lives. He knows now, and he's no fool. Besides, his people are all tired of playing up to playing up to us. I say, act now, before he brings a whole body of Achaeans to assemble. And he would leave no word unsaid, in righteous anger speaking out before them all of how we plotted murder and then missed him. Will they commend us for that petty work? Take action now, or we are in for trouble. We might be exiled, driven off our lands. Let the first blow be ours. If we move first and get our hands on him, far from the city's eye, on path or field, then stores and livestock will be ours to share. The house we may confer upon his mother and on the man who marries her. Decide otherwise you may. But if, my friends, you want that boy to live and to have his patrimony, then we should eat no more of his good mutton, come to this place no more. Let each from his own hall court her with dower gifts, and let her marry the destined one, the one who offers the most. He ended, and no sound was heard among them, sitting all hushed, until at last the son of Nisos, Aretates, arose. Amphinomus. So, Antinous and Amphinomus. I know. What can you do? He led the group of suitors who came from the grain lands on Dulichian, and he had lightness in his talk that pleased Penelope, for he meant no ill. Now in concern for them he spoke. Oh, friends, I should not like to kill Telemachus. It is a shivery thing to kill a prince of royal blood. We should consult the gods. If Zeus hands down a ruling for the act, then I shall say, come one, come all, and go cut him down with my own hand. But I say halt if the gods are contrary. So he wants to take essentially an omen. He wants to ask the gods if it's the right thing to do to kill Telemachus or not. Now this proposal won them, and it carried, breaking their session up. Away they went to take their smooth chairs in Odysseus's house. Meanwhile, Penelope the Wise decided for her part to make appearance before the valiant young men. She knew now they plotted her child's death in her own hall. This is one of the things that the swineherd told her. For once more Mendon, who had heard them, told her in the hall that lovely lady came with maids attending and approaching the suitors, till near a pillar of the well-wrought roof she paused, her shining veil across her cheeks, and spoke directly to Antinous. Infatuate, steeped in evil, yet in Ithaca they say you are the best one of your generation in mind and speech. Not so. You never were. Madman, why do you keep forever knitting death for Telemachus? Have you no piety towards men, dependent on another's mercy? Before Lord Zeus, no sanction can be found for one such man to plot against another. Or are you not aware that your own father fled to us when the realm was up in arms against him? He had joined the Taphian pirates in ravaging Thesprotian folk, our friends. Our people would have raided him then, breached his heart, butchered his herds to feast upon. Only Odysseus took him in and held the furious townsmen off. It is Odysseus's house you now consume, his wife you court, his son you kill or try to kill, and me you ravage now and grieve. I call upon you to make an end of it, and your friends too. So we're getting some information here. Antinous, the worst one, his dad actually owes Odysseus his life and for everything he owns, and Antinous doesn't care. He's a spoiled, entitled, all of these kinds of words that we would now use, old people use for the younger generation. We're definitely applying it to this younger generation of Greeks in this story. The son of Polybose it was, Eurymachus, who answered her with ready speech. My lady Penelope, wise daughter of Icarius, you must shake off these ugly thoughts. I say that man does not exist nor will who dares lay hands upon your son Telemachus. While I live, walk the earth, and use my eyes, the man's lifeblood, I swear, will spurt and run out black around my lance head. For it is true of me, too, that Odysseus, raider of cities, took me on his knees and fed me often tidbits of red wine. Should not Telemachus therefore be dear to me above the rest of men? I tell the lad he must not tremble for his life, at least alone in the suitor's company. Heaven deals death, no man avoids. Blasphemous lies. In earnest tones he told, the one who planned the lad's destruction. Silently the lady made her way to her glowing upper chamber, there to weep for her dear lord Odysseus, until gray-eyed Athena cast sweet sleep upon her eyes. At fall of dusk, Odysseus and his son heard the approach of the good forester. This is Eumaeus the swineherd. They had been standing over the fire with the spitted pig, a yearling, and Athena, coming near, with one rap of her wand made Odysseus an old man again, with rags about him. For if the swineherd knew his lord were there, he could not hold the news. Penelope would hear it from him. Now, Telemachus greeted him first. Eumaeus, back again? What was the talk in town? Are the tall suitors home again by this time from their ambush, or are they still on watch for my return? And you replied, Eumaeus, O my swineherd, there was no time to ask or talk of that. I hurried through the town. Even while I spoke my message, I felt driven to return. A runner from your friends turned up, a crier, who gave the news first to your mother. One thing I do know, with my own two eyes I saw it. As I climbed above the town to where the sky is cut by Hermes Ridge, I saw a ship bound in for our bay, with many oarsmen in it, laden down with sea provisioning and two-edged spears, and I surmised those were the men. Who knows? Telemachus, now strong with magic, smiled across at his own father, but avoided the swineherd's eye. So when the pig was done, the spit no longer to be turned, the table garnished, everyone sat down to feast on all the savory flesh he carved. And when they had put off desire for meat and drink, they turned to bed and took the gift of sleep. All right, and that's the end of this book, and we're going to move on to book 17, The Beggar at the Manor, but we'll read it in this other version. It's a relatively short thing, so hopefully we'll be able to get this one done before the 40 minutes is up. We'll see. So this one starts out with an italics, but we already read this. Telemachus returns home, and Odysseus, no, I guess we didn't, with the swineherd soon follow. Odysseus is still disguised as a beggar. So Odysseus comes to his own house, disguised as a beggar. He goes with Eumaeus into town so that he doesn't have to beg from, he says, he doesn't have to beg from Eumaeus anymore. It's hard to take money from a poor man. He's going to go to the wealthiest house in town and try and beg there. And Eumaeus warns him the place is full of suitors who will treat him badly, but Odysseus doesn't care. And we're going to get this scene where Odysseus meets his dog, Argos. And this is, it's a pretty tough scene to read. So I'm going to read it and then we'll analyze it a little bit. While he spoke, an old hound lying near pricked up his ears and lifted his muzzle. This was Argos, trained as a puppy by Odysseus, but never taken on a hunt before his master sailed for Troy. The young men afterwards hunted wild goats with him, and hare and deer, but he had grown old in his master's absence. Treated as rubbish now, he lay at last upon a mass of dung before the gates, manure of mules and cows piled there until field hands could spread it on the king's estate. Abandoned there and half destroyed with flies, old Argos lay. So this dog was a puppy when Odysseus left on his journey. It's been 20 years, and now the dog is super duper old, older than a dog has a right to be, and he's in a horrible state outside. This is going to be the second test of Odysseus, right? He saw his son, he had to pretend not to know. Now he sees this dog that he trained as a puppy and loved. You know how you have a bond with a dog, and Odysseus sees his own dog, and the dog is going to recognize him, and he's going to have to resist the temptation to go to it. But when he knew this is the dog, he heard Odysseus' voice nearby. He did his best to wag his tail, nose down with flattened ears, having no strength to move nearer his master. And the man looked away, wiping a salt tear from his cheek, but he hid this from Eumaeus. Then he said, I marvel that they leave this hound to lie here on the dung pile. Would have been a fine dog from the look of him, though I can't say as to his power and speed when he was young. You find the same good build in house dogs, table dogs, landowners keep, all for style. And you replied, Eumaeus, a hunter owned him, but the man's dead in some far place. This old hound could show the form he had when Lord Odysseus left him, going for Troy. You'd see him swift and strong. He never shrank from any savage thing. He brought to bay in the deep woods on the scent. No other dog kept up with him. Now misery has him in leash. His owner died abroad, and here the women slaves will take no care of him. You know how servants are without a master. They have no will to labor or excel. For Zeus, who views the wide world, takes away half the manhood of a man that day he goes into captivity and slavery. Eumaeus crossed the court and went straight forward into the Megaron among the suitors. But death and darkness in that instant closed the eyes of Argos, who had seen his master Odysseus after 20 years. So the real sad thing is that the dog sees his master Odysseus after 20 years, wags his tail. Odysseus can't go and greet him, and then the dog dies before Odysseus can do anything. So it's like it's been waiting for Odysseus to come home, and that news finish it off. Actually, sort of a interesting story about this dog. One of the most famous poets of the English Romantic period was this guy Lord Byron. We read his poem Prometheus back when we did the Prometheus story. And he was an animal lover. He loved animals, and he had dogs his whole life. He actually got exiled from England, and he said the one thing that made him really sad was that he couldn't bring his dog with him, and he knew he'd never see his dog again. He didn't care about England, but he cared about his dog. He also famously said he never liked the Odyssey, and it never impacted him except for the one scene where the dog dies. And of course, this is that scene. So this is another trial of Odysseus, having to sit there and not react, not show any emotion again, having to master himself and have that level of self-control. So now we get an italicized bit. It says, Odysseus enters his home as a beggar, and the suitors mock and abuse him. Penelope asks to speak with the beggar, but Odysseus puts her off until nightfall. Okay, but that skips a lot of important stuff, and we're going to do some classwork on these bits right here. So I've got to pause the video and go find this in the other version of the text, and we'll pick back up with that in a second. Long before anyone else, Telemachus caught sight of the gray woodman coming from the door and called him over with a quick jerk of his head. Eumaeus' narrowed eyes made out an empty bench beside the one the carver used, that servant who had no respite, carving for the suitors. This bench he took possession of and placed it across the table from Telemachus for his own use. Then the two men were served cuts from a roast and bread from a bread basket. At no long interval, Odysseus came through his own doorway as a mendicant, humped like a bundle of rags over his stick. He settled on the inner ashwood sill, leaning against the door jamb, cypress timber, the skilled carpenter planed years ago and set up with a plumb line. Now Telemachus took an entire loaf and a double handful of roast meat, and then he said to the forester is Eumaeus the swineherd, in case you can't tell, a forester is sort of the synonym for him right now. Give these to the stranger there, but tell him to go among the suitors on his own. He may beg all he wants. This hanging back is no asset to a hungry man. The swineherd rose at once, crossing to the door, and halted by Odysseus. Friend, he said, Telemachus is pleased to give you these, but he commands you to approach the suitors. You may ask all that you want from them. He adds, your shyness is no asset to a beggar. The great tactician, lifting up his eyes, cried, Zeus aloft, a blessing on Telemachus. Let all things come to pass he desires. So this is going to open up some interesting sort of ironic moments. Here's Odysseus in his own house as a beggar. And what's interesting is he's going to go around and beg from all of the suitors, and the suitors are going to, for the most part, sort of refuse to give him anything. But ironically, this is Odysseus' house. And the ones who are really beggars in this house are the suitors. And the suitors are actually eating Odysseus' food, and so Odysseus is asking guests in his own house for some of his own food, and they're going to deny it to him. And so we created this situation. We as readers know that this is Odysseus, but they as characters do not. And so we've got that irony going on as well. And then look at some of the things that are said, and the way that they come across, and the way we understand them as readers versus the way they were intended by the suitors themselves, and how that sort of is different as well. We're going to do some classwork on irony, so it's important to pay attention to these lines. And I can already tell I'm going to go over 45 minutes. Apologies for that, but don't worry, next class is going to be just a work day, so we'll make up the difference of this long lecture today tomorrow, I promise. Let's see. The great tactician, lifting up his eyes, cried, Zeus aloft, a blessing on Telemachus. Let all things come to pass as he desires. Palms held out in the beggar's gesture, he received the bread and meat and put it down before him on his knapsack, lowly table. Then he fell to devouring it. Meanwhile, the harper in the great room sang a song. Not till the man was fed did the sweet harper end his singing, whereupon the company made the walls ring again with talk. Unseen, Athena took up her place beside Odysseus, whispering in his ear, "Yes, try the suitors. You may collect a few more loaves and learn who are the decent lads and who are the vicious, although not one can be excused from death." So he appealed to them one after another, going from left to right with open palm, as though his lifetime had been spent in beggary. And they gave bread for pity, wondering, though, at the strange man. Who could this beggar be? Where did he come from? Each would ask his neighbor, till in their midst the goatherd Melanthios. Now, we have this juxtaposition, this contrast between the swineherd, who was a loyal fellow, loyal to Odysseus even though Odysseus is gone, and Melanthius, the goatherd, who loves the suitors and mistreats Odysseus in his own house. Melanthius raised his voice. "Hear just a word from me, my lords, who court our illustrious queen. This man, this foreigner, I saw him on the road. The swineherd here was leading him this way. Who, what, or whence he claims to be, I could not say for sure." At this, Antinous turned on the swineherd, brutally saying, "You famous breeder of pigs, why bring this fellow here? Are we not plagued enough with beggars, foragers, and such rats? You find the company too slow at eating up your lord's estate? Is that it? So you call this scarecrow in?" The forester replied, "Antinous, well born you are, but that was not well said. Who would call in a foreigner unless an artisan with skill to serve the realm, a healer or a prophet or a builder, or one whose harp and song might give us joy? All these are sought for in the endless earth, but when have beggars come by invitation? Who puts a field mouse in his granary? My lord, you are a hard man, and you always were, more so than the others of this company. Hard on all Odysseus' people and on me, but this I can forget, as long as Penelope lives on, the wise and tender mistress of this hall, as long as Prince Telemachus—" But he broke off at a look from Telemachus, who said, "Be still. Spare me a long-drawn answer to this gentleman. With his unpleasantness, he will forever make strife where he can, and goad the others on." He turned and spoke out clearly to Antinous. "What fatherly concern you show me? Frighten this unknown fellow, would you, from my hall, with words that promise blows? May God forbid it. Give him a loaf. Am I a niggard? No. I call on you to give, and spare your qualms. As to my mother's loss, or anyone's, not that in truth you have such care at heart. Your heart is all in feeding and not in giving." So, it's a rebuke from Telemachus. There's a word in here I should probably look at. This word, niggard. It is not the racial slur. It's an entirely different word. It sounds very similar. Basically, that word means somebody who is a miser, somebody who doesn't like spending money or giving things away. And so he's like, am I a miser? No, I don't mind giving things away to people who come to my house. And he reminds Antinous that this is his food. This is his house. What Antinous is doing is he's assuming that he's going to be the one that owns all of this stuff, and he doesn't like giving it away to anybody. Antinous replied, "What high and mighty talk, Telemachus. No holding you. If every suitor gave what I may give him, he could be kept for months. Keep out of sight." He reached under a table for a footstool his shining feet had rested on, and this he held up so that all could see his gift. But all the rest gave alms, enough to fill the beggar's pack with bread and roast meat. So it looked as though Odysseus had his taste of what these men were like, and could return scot-free to his own doorway. But halting now before Antinous, he made a little speech to him. Said he, "Give a mite, friend. I would not say myself you are the worst man of the young Achaeans, the noblest rather, kingly by your looks. Therefore you'll give more bread than the others do. Let me speak well of you as I pass on over the boundless earth. I, too, had fortune once, lived well, stood well with men, and gave alms often to poor wanderers, like the one that you see. I, to all sorts, no matter in what dire want. I own servants, many, God knows, and all the rest that goes with being prosperous, as they say. But Zeus, the son of Cronus, brought me down." So this is sort of an ironic statement, too, because we all know this is true. Odysseus did own all this land and all this great stuff, and now he's a beggar. Like this is still his land, and it's kind of funny. So he's warning Antinous that he may one day face the same fate. "No telling why he would have it, but he made me go to Egypt with a company of rovers, a long sail to the south, for my undoing. Upon the broad Nile and in the river bank I brought my dripping squadron. There indeed. I told the men to stand guard at the ships. I sent out patrols out to rising ground, but reckless greed carried my crews away to plunder Egyptian farms. They bore off wives and children, killed what men they found. The news ran on the wind to the city. A night cry and sunrise brought both infantry and horsemen, filling the river plain with a dazzle of bronze. Then Zeus, lord of lightning, threw my men into a blind panic. No one dared stand against that host closing round us. Their scything weapons left our dead in piles. But some they took alive into forced labor, myself among them. And they gave me then to one Demeter, a traveler, son of Isos, who ruled Cyprus. He conveyed me there, from that place working northward miserably. But here Antinous broke in, shouting, God, what evil wind blew in this pest? Get over. Stand in the passage. Nudge my table, will you? Egyptian whips are sweet to what you'll come to here, you nosing rat. Make your pitch to everyone. These men have bread to throw away on you because it is not theirs. Who cares? Who spares another's food when he has more than plenty? With guile, Odysseus drew away, then said, A pity you have not more looks. A pity that you have more looks than heart. You'd grudge a pinch of salt from your own larder to your own handyman. You sit there fat on others' meat and cannot bring yourself to rummage out a crust of bread for me. Then anger made Antinous' heart beat hard, and glowering under his brows he answered, Now you'll think you'll shuffle off and get away after that impudence? Oh, no you don't. The stool he let fly hit the man's right shoulder, on the packed muscle under the shoulder blade, like solid rock. For all the effect one saw, Odysseus only shook his head, containing thoughts of bloody work as he walked on, then sat and drooped his loaded bag again upon the door-sill. Facing the whole crowd, he said, and eyed them all, One word only, my lords and suitors of the famous queen. One thing I have to say. There is no pain, no burden for the heart when blows come to a man, and he is defending his own cattle, his own cows and lambs. Here 'twas otherwise. Antinous hit me for being driven on by hunger. How many bitter seas man crossed for hunger! If beggars interest the gods, and if there are furies pent in the dark to avenge poor man's wrong, then may Antinous meet his death before his wedding day. Note the words there. Then Eupeithes' son Antinous said, Enough! Eat and be quiet where you are, or shamble elsewhere, unless you want these lads to stop your mouth, pulling you by the heels or hands and feet over the whole floor till your back is peeled. But now the rest were mortified, and someone spoke from the crowd of young bucks to rebuke him. A poor show that, hitting this famished tramp. Bad business. If he happened to be a god, you know they go in foreign disguise, the gods do, looking like strangers, turning up in towns and settlements to keep an eye on manners, good or bad. It's funny because this is sort of true. But at this notion, Antinous only shrugged. Telemachus, after the blow his father bore, sat still without a tear, though his heart felt the blow. Slowly he shook his head from side to side, containing murderous thoughts. Penelope, on the higher level of her room, had heard the blow and knew who gave it. Now she murmured, Would God you could be hit yourself, Antinous, hit by Apollo's bowshot. That may be foreshadowing. And Eurynome, her housekeeper, put in, He and no other. If all we pray for come to pass, not one would live till dawn. Her gentle mistress said, Oh, Nan, they're a bad lot. They intend ruin for all of us, but Antinous appears a blacker-hearted hound than any. Here is a poor man come, a wanderer, driven by want to beg his bread, and everyone in the hall gave bits to cram his bag. Only Antinous threw a stool and banged his shoulder. So she described it, sitting in her chamber among her maids, while her true lord was eating. Then she called in the forester and said, Go to that man on my behalf, Eumaeus, and send him here, so I can greet and question him. Abroad in the great world, he may have heard rumors about Odysseus, may have known him. So Penelope's like, go get that old man, bring him up here. I want to talk to him, see if he knows Odysseus. Aha! Right, like, he is Odysseus. Then you replied, O swineherd, My queen, if these Chian sprigs would hush their babble, the man could tell you tales to charm your heart. 3 days and nights I kept him in my hut. He came straight off a ship, to me. There was no end to what he made me hear of his hard rovings, and I listened, eyes upon him, as a man drinks in a tale, a minstrel sings, a minstrel taught by heaven to touch the hearts of men. At such a song the listener becomes rapt and still. Just so I found myself enchanted by this man. He claims an old tie with Odysseus, too, in his home country, the Minoan land of Crete. From Crete he came, a rolling stone washed by gales of life, this way and that to our own beach. If he can be believed, he has news of Odysseus near at hand, alive in the rich country of the Sportia, bringing a mass of treasure home. Then wise Penelope said again, Go, call him, let him come here. Let him tell the tale again for my own ears. Our friends can drink their cups outside or stay in the hall, being so carefree, and why not? Their stores lie intact in their homes, both food and drink, with only servants left to take a little. But these men spend their days around our house, killing our beef, our fat goats, and our sheep, carousing, drinking up our good dark wine, sparing nothing, squandering everything. No champion like Odysseus takes our part. Ah, if he comes again, no falcon ever struck more suddenly than he will, with his son to avenge this outrage. The great hall below at this point rang with a tremendous sneeze. Achoo! From Telemachus, like an acclamation, and laughter seized Penelope. Then quickly, lucidly, she went on. Go, call the stranger straight to me. Did you hear that, Eumaeus? My son's thundering sneeze at what I said. May death come all of a sudden, so. May death relieve us and clean as that of all the suitors. Let me add one thing. Do not overlook it. If I can see this man has told the truth, I promise him a warm new cloak and tunic. With all this in his head, the forester went down to the hall and halted near the beggar, saying aloud, Good father, you're called for by the wise mother of Telemachus, Penelope. The queen, despite her troubles, is moved by desire to hear your tales about her lord, and if she finds him true, she'll see you clothed in what you need, a cloak and a fresh tunic. You may have your belly full each day you go about this realm begging, for all may give and all they wish. Now Odysseus, the old soldier, Friend, I wish this instant I could tell my facts to the wise daughter of Icarius, Penelope, and I have much to tell about her husband. We went through much together. This is, of course, ironic as well. But just now, this hard crowd worries me, they are. You said infamous to the very rim of heaven for violent acts, and here, just now, this fellow gave me a bruise. What had I done to him? But who would lift a hand for me? Telemachus? Anyone else? No, bid the queen be patient. Let her remain till sundown in a room, and then, if she will seat me near the fire, inquire tonight about her lord's return. My rags are sorry cover, you know that. I showed my sad condition first to you. The woodman heard him out, and then returned to the queen, met her on the threshold, crying, Have you not brought him? Why? What is he thinking? Has he some fear of overstepping? Shy about these inner rooms? A hangdog beggar? To this you answered, friend Eumaeus, No, his reasons, as another might as well, not to tempt any swordplay from these drunkards. Be patient, wait, he says, till darkness falls, and, oh, my queen, for you too that is better. Better you be alone with him and question him and hear him out. Penelope replied, He is no fool. He sees how it could be. Never were mortal men like these for bullying and brainless arrogance. Thus she accepted what had been promised. So he went back to the crowd. He joined Telemachus and sat at once with whispers, his head bent so that no one else might hear. Dear prince, I must go home to keep good watch on hut and swine, and look to my own affairs. Everything here is in your hands. Consider your own safety before the rest. Take care not to get hurt. Many are the dangers here. May Zeus destroy them first before we suffer. Telemachus said, Your wish is mine, uncle. Go where your meal is finished, then come back at dawn and bring good victims for a slaughter. Everything here is in my hands indeed, and the disposition of the gods. Taking his seat on the smooth bench again, Eumaeus ate and drank his fill, then rose to climb the mountain trail back to his swine, leaving the Megaron and the court behind him, crowded with banqueters. These had their joy of dance and song as day waned into evening. And that's going to be where we stop for today. It's about an hour. So we'll go from there. We're going to move on next time. This book 18 is not in the textbook, so we'll just be using this document. It's a fun little passage. The suitor's not content with having thrown a stool at Odysseus and made him feel like a beggar in his own home. There's another beggar who often frequents Odysseus' house, and he's going to show up, and the suitors are going to be like, "We're only going to feed one beggar," and they're going to make them fight each other, and so it's going to be like this beggar fight, and it's going to be, they're going to think it's hilarious. And that's what's coming up. And then, of course, Odysseus has to meet his wife, which is going to be the greatest challenge of all. He's been waiting to see her for 20 years, and now he's going to have to control himself and lie to her so that he doesn't disrupt the surprise that's essential to his plan for defeating the suitors. So all of this is coming up. Apologies for going over my time. I wanted to keep all these to 45 minutes, but it is what it is. Don't worry about the classwork today. We'll work on classwork next time.